What pleasures and or benefits do you experience from your substance use?
I really love this question. Where do I even start? Pleasures and benefits. I would say that these definitely depend on which substance I'm using. However, there are similar benefits that I can find in multiple substances. Um, so I'll just use kind of those as examples, like the benefits that I can find in more than one substance. The first thing that comes to mind is definitely the therapeutic side of each trip or session. I think that taking drugs really I don't know, really peels back the mask that I usually can't remove myself, which leads me to being totally vulnerable. And I think this is when I guess you could say, true self is more exposed than usual. This might sound unpleasant, and perhaps it is at moments. However, I find it really therapeutic and very necessary for my self development. And when I'm around people that I really love and we're taking MDMA, for example, I'll use that as my example now, which is a euphoric and stimulating substance. I find that opening up is completely inevitable, and sharing our true selves with each other during these experiences is a must, really. Um, I find myself also having difficult conversations that I wouldn't usually have outside of these experiences with people that I really love. Conversations that need to be had. I find myself having them, and in the end, it turns me and often the person I'm speaking to into a better person or better people. And drugs just really allow me to open up and be really honest about what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, and this is something I usually struggle with because vulnerability to me is not very pleasant. So I think things like MDMA are specifically beneficial to me in these areas. But when it comes to taking psychedelics, specifically psilocybin mushrooms, which is my favorite psychedelic and pretty much always has been, it really helps me with managing my anxiety and my PTSD, which is two things that I've struggled with for what feels like forever, really. Whether that be through microdosing or taking a heroic dose of mushrooms, I have always found that it really helps me objectively view my problems. This has specifically been helpful with my PTSD, which has always seemed like a impossible thing to face, never mind work through. It's always something I thought that I could never work on because I just didn't have the tools to work on it myself. Even through lots of therapy sessions and lots of work, it just seemed terrifying and impossible. And mushrooms has helped me massively with this. And I think that it's fair to say that psychedelics, for me specifically, have literally saved my life at least a few times and have pulled me out of my own darkness, which might sound quite dramatic, but it's the truth. And I think it's the truth for many people. Many people deal with serious issues like this that can be crippling, and it seems like there's no way to go about it. And I have found that psychedelics have been my most beneficial and effective tool for tackling things like PTSD, anxiety, and so many other things. I could talk about it for days and days, really, but these are the two main things that have changed my life through drug use. As far as pleasures go, I don't know if I really need to explain this. I think it's quite obvious that the pleasures with substances can be countless, really. The sensations, the effects, the connections, the bliss, it's all extremely pleasureful. Um, yeah, there's so many pleasures that come along with these experiences, which I think in themselves are extremely beneficial. Experiencing such bliss is just unmatchable. Um, Overall, I really believe that I would not be the person that I am today without these unique and therapeutic experiences that I have had. And the main things I have gotten from these substances has been self-discovery, self-development, and just opening up my mind to new ideas and perspectives that I wouldn't have gained without the substances, I don't believe. Those are the main things that I have gained throughout my journey of substance use.
What concerns do you have for yourself and or others when using these substances?
I think that the concerns for me are the concerns for a lot of people. The obvious things such as a lack of education on these substances, untrusted sources like street dealers, and well, substance abuse. Obviously, substance abuse I think is the main concern for me and for many people. And I think that this is a really good question because I think this is something that a lot of recreational substance users don't like to talk about. If they don't have a problem with substance abuse, they don't like to talk about it. You know, a lot of recreational users, you know, preach that, you know, drugs are all good and they're only good, but this is the reality with drug use. There's always a risk involved, and I think it's extremely important to cover this topic, like substance abuse. I think it's just so important because so many people all over the globe really suffer from this. And I'm always someone who really preaches that trauma and pain are kind of the things that push people into such addiction. And I get really concerned about thinking about those in pain who haven't been given proper drug education that go and do take drugs, because I think that's where things go wrong typically. You know, and also hanging around and taking drugs around people that don't have your well-being in mind, whilst you have an addictive personality or you have a lot of pain. I think it's just a cocktail for disaster. And like I said, many people in the scene don't like talking about it because it can be really unpleasant, but I think the lack of conversation is what is damaging. Like the taboo around drugs is what forms a lot of these issues, in my opinion. And on top of it all, additionally, I think that humans have a tendency to have this this like, oh, it won't be me kind of mind state when it comes to drugs and many other things. And I think this can lead to really careless behavior and then to danger. And I think that mishaps occurring when taking drugs is more rare than perhaps the media tells us. However, it does happen, and I think people should take substance abuse more seriously in all kinds of environments, but specifically in party environments. And I know that addiction is often a risk being taken. However, I really believe that the pain is the ultimate gateway drug, rather than any particular substance. I think pain and the taboo are the main issues. And, you know, that being said, it worries me when people with addictive personalities are taking substances around, you know, a circle of friends that would rather not have the difficult conversation if things were to end up getting out of hand. Yeah, I think my main concerns to wrap this up would be the lack of education on substances, substance abuse itself, and the taboo that I think feeds all of these risks and all of these issues the most. I think we need to have these discussions and we need to dismantle the taboo around substance and substance abuse.
What interventions do you think would be helpful?
Although it is much easier said than done, I think introducing decriminalization, more drug education, and focusing on childhood and childhood trauma would be the most logical route to go down. Since these substances are illegal, it makes it really hard to find solid information, especially because of the intense censoring that happens on pretty much any internet platform. You know, it's so hard to find good information because even if it's out there, it gets taken down eventually. So, you know, that, so many people just have absolutely no drug education, which is horribly dangerous if you ask me. Like using myself as an example, I remember going to school when I was a young girl, which to be fair was a Christian school, and most of us know that Christians typically teach that drugs are simply evil and you should never touch them. Anyway, I remember we had what they called a drug education lesson, which was a hour long thing. That's all we had, was like an hour where they taught us the typical like don't do drugs thing, like, you know, like that was the only lesson that they gave us, was like don't do them, which is so counterproductive. You know, teaching young individuals real drug education and teaching them the actual risks without using fear as a tactic would be or would result in less harm when they eventually do go and do drugs someday. You know, it's completely illogical to just teach a classroom of kids to not do drugs because, like, statistically, one of them is going to go and try drugs one day. So that there's no harm reduction being done whatsoever. And in my opinion, pain is the ultimate issue in drug abuse. And I do not agree whatsoever with the concept of drugs, like the actual chemicals themselves being the issue. I think that the real chemicals to blame would be the brain chemicals that people in pain cannot bear to experience anymore, which can lead to escapism, for example. And I think this is where the real harm lies. Getting a bit personal, I'll use my mother as an example because I think it's a really good one. My mother, sadly, is a heroin and crack addict, and she's been homeless since I was a young girl when she left my father. And when I look at her situation, I feel as though the issue is so clear, like so crystal clear what happened here. You look at this woman and you look at her life, and she had a horribly traumatizing childhood, which I think is where a lot of these issues stem from. And this led her to what seemed like endless issues and various mental illnesses in her adulthood. And when her and my father's relationship fell through, she didn't know what to do with all this additional pain, and she must have felt like she was out of options. So she did what a lot of people do, and she tried to fill this void, this painful void, instead of working through her deep-rooted issues. And this eventually led to a life of even more pain and even more suffering, and jail time and crime and isolation from everyone she's ever known and loved. She just it just ruined her. This pain just ruined her, and drugs was just part of this self-destruction. And that being said, I think that breaking the cycle of trauma and focusing on children and the raising of children, and giving like young individuals productive drug education from a young age, and decriminalizing those who do end up falling into this trap that my mother has found herself in. I think this is the best way to go about it. And I think redirecting the blame from the victim and instead blaming the system set in place for them is the only way to move forward. And that is what I will continue to preach to those around me. And I think that is the only way out of this issue.